Ripe Fruit is a nonprofit education initiative dedicated to identifying and strengthening innate skills as they appear along the spectrum of ways we think and learn. Our mission is to infuse mainstream learning with enhanced curriculum, customized lesson plans, and demonstrated creative systems. We aim to foster comprehensive learning, enthusiasm, and confidence for all students. The Dean Talks serves as a conduit, think tank, and intensive to discuss how to identify and support unique learning styles. All systems are go. The Dean Talks starts now.
Welcome to the definition of trauma. We're going to talk about how to recognize trauma without stigmatizing it, and how to create trauma-informed environments, whether it be in a learning environment, at home, or in a workplace. We'll discuss frameworks for trauma, such as adverse childhood experience, trauma responses, such as fight or flight, freeze or fawn. The discussion will cover post-traumatic stress syndrome and some unexpected places you might find it, like in a child or in a returning citizen. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of hosts or sponsors or Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. This session is being recorded. Today, we are joined by an amazing panel.
And as we bring this panel in, I want to go ahead and begin to give you their bios. And you may see bits and pieces of them show up on the screen. Let me tell you about Angel Wilson. First, Angel Wilson is an activist, writer, filmmaker, entrepreneur in Baltimore, Maryland. She's the co-director of the award-winning documentary, Hiding in the Walls, a film that offers an inside look into Baltimore's lead poisoning crisis. Lori Stokes. Lori Stokes holds a Bachelor of Arts from Washington State University and an Associate of Science and Occupational Therapy assistant from, I'm going to mispronounce it, Kapiolani Community College in Hawaii. You can correct this, Lori, when you get a chance to chime in. She started Children's Therapy Group, a pediatric telehealth occupational and speech therapy practice in 2021 to provide foundational services to the Medicaid communities throughout Baltimore and the state of Maryland. They utilize a variety of frameworks and models to include developmental, neurological, and trauma-informed care to deliver holistic attention to the families they serve. All right, let's talk about Carrie Miller, an artist, teacher, business owner, and mother of two neurodivergent kids. Her son, for a year, had PTSD from experiencing life in multiple foster placements. Trauma-informed parenting methods were necessary for healing and survival as a family. Now parenting using the same healing trauma-informed methods with her 4-year-old adopted daughter with Down syndrome. Her research and experience direct her visual art forms in hopes to open the conversation in larger circles, which is what we're here to do. So awesome. And then Stephen Fabius. Stephen Fabius is a licensed marriage and family therapist with National Pike Health with 16 years outpatient, in-home, and treatment facility experience with depression, anxiety, OCD, grief, anger, trauma, and family relational problems. Steve utilizes trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT, that's a mouthful, as he helps families move towards healthier relationships. Thank you all for joining. Please, welcome the panel and the chat, and we'll hear more from them in a moment.
Let's open our discussion with a video snippet to set the stage for the panel to join and react.
Oh my God, it got right on his hand.
Just don't let those jerks on the internet get to you. You're lucky. Nowadays, you can just block them. Case closed.
I would like to welcome Nicole Fall. She's a frequent flyer here with the Dean Talks. Nicole's always good to see. So question number one, let's start with a definition of trauma and what it means to be trauma informed and how to apply it in real time. Let's start with Steve.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is such a pleasure to speak with you all and being able to be on this panel. I would actually just kind of start off with it's a very, I think all of us are pretty familiar with the word trauma. And let's go with a proper definition of what it is, which is a very lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, as well as the ability to regulate emotions and navigate through those relationships. As we all know, trauma kind of formulates in different types of ways, but there are three types of trauma that we are familiar, maybe not as familiar with, and those are acute, chronic, and complex. Trauma, as far as the acute trauma, it results from a single incident, right? Either or an accident or car accident that you might have seen, or the chronic trauma could be defined as a repeated, prolonged, such as domestic violence, domestic abuse that is happening. And complex trauma is an exposure to a variety or multiple traumatic events, often as invasive or interpersonal nature. And I think that when you think about trauma, it's so very vast, but there are different components of it that everyone should be very, very familiar with. One of the things that I also wanted to kind of point out, in addition to that, is what I think that is very important for all agencies is any services that are providing treatment is to be TIC, which is an acronym for being trauma informed care. And which is an approach for human services fields that assumes that an individual is more than likely not to have any history of trauma. However, the TIC recognizes the presence of any trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role of trauma may play in an individual's life, including their service staff. So we come in with the mindset that there more than likely is some trauma that is happening, and we may need to do a little bit more digging and do a little bit more processing and going through that. In regards to understanding more about what trauma is, there are different types of responses to trauma. And fight or flight, right? We've heard this even when we were in grade school about what fight or flight is. Fight or flight are your basic stress responses that your body reacts to it, either to any kind of danger that may be happening. The fight response is your body way of facing any perceived threat or aggressively, as well as flight, meaning that your body is finding a way to run from danger. And freeze, which is kind of fight, flight, or freeze, is your body's inability to act or move against any of those types of danger. There is another one that doesn't really get talked about much, and that's fawn. And fawn is your body's response to try to please someone, to avoid any additional conflicts that may be happening. The goal for any of these fight or flight responses and fawn is to basically try to decrease and end and evade any kind of danger and return to a place that you guys are much more calmer and in a relaxed state.
Okay. And we are defining trauma from the panel's perspective and what it means to be trauma informed and how to apply it in real time. Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Steve. That was a great definition. And I really appreciated how you talked about how just the definition of trauma is adverse experiences. And I think one thing to keep in mind is that we all experience levels of adverse experiences, but it's how the person's reaction to those experiences, which can be different. And complex trauma is usually multiple adverse experiences that are going to create that complex trauma. And I think one of the biggest things when you are considering trauma and people's effects of it, do they have that network of like attachment with a healthy adult figure that they can work through the trauma and it doesn't affect that adverse experience doesn't affect them to where it becomes trauma. Because me experiencing something traumatic that can be seen as traumatic and acute event, but if I have that network behind me of attachment, then it doesn't become as traumatic as if somebody that does not have that. And I think that that's why it's important to look at it holistically and for the full family to be involved in that definition of figuring out what level of trauma and what was the trauma that the people are experiencing. I hope that makes some kind of sense. And I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely made perfect sense. Lori, what do you have to add?
Yes, thank you. So I'm looking at trauma through an occupational therapy lens, and there's a lot of overlap there in that if you look at it from a neurological approach or a standpoint, occupational therapy, we do a lot with sensory integration, and we recognize we have 8 different sensory systems that help us to process information and regulate our body and our emotions. And one of those sensory systems is called interoception. So that's really our body's signal of what's going on inside. So how do we know when we're hungry, thirsty, these things? And these things feel like very minute or kind of detectors, but when we can identify what is going on in our body, like know what that sensation means, know how to regulate our bodies after that after that moves to maybe the place of having a traumatic response, we can often help in our field. We can often help increase that body awareness, increase that awareness of what's going on in the body, so that there's more empowerment to be able to have some control of how that neurological response is showing up as a result to trauma in someone's life. So we start in a variety of ways, and the first things that we do is just like, what is a body sensation? Because the body really does tell us so much. It's such a great indicator to us as to if our system is regulated or not. And so that language for us, we work with children and families as well, but predominantly with children. We like to keep it very, very simplified. Do you feel like your body is regulated or dysregulated? So it's based on the nervous system. It allows a simplified language for being able to process what's going on in the body, so that we can regulate the systems and prepare ourselves for higher learning. So,
all right, thank you very much. Angel, your definition of trauma and what it means to be trauma informed.
Thank you so much for all of you for your contributions. And as Stephen said, it is a reaction to distressing events. So my view of trauma, I work with a lot of students, and I see trauma in a lot of high school students. I'm always breaking up fights or de-escalating different situations. And so a lot of in these events, as Stephen said, they're acute, chronic, complex. A lot of these students are dealing with it in very different ways. Whether in the video it's simply as bullying, which can seem acute, but then they go home and they have these complex situations where they're dealing with it at home every day. And then they come to school and it's normalized the way that they're reacting, if they're fussing out their teacher, or if they're fighting and they don't even know why. So a lot of ways that I try to get the students is to become trauma informed is understanding why they are acting this way. You know what I mean? And as Lori said, identifying bodily responses. So why are you so angry? You know, why do you want to fight? You know, and we have to, in my field, just destigmatize the idea that trauma is something that you have to be ashamed of, or something that is easy to deal with. So that's really one of the ways that I deal with it, and also apply it in real time. So telling the students, sharing my own experiences with trauma, you know what I mean, and also helping them just unpack it, you know, in certain ways, whether that's breathing exercises or just talking through it. Sometimes they just don't have anyone to talk to, and trying to peel back that layer of understanding why they're dealing with these different traumas and why they're reacting in this way.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to add a little something to this trauma conversation myself. There was a movie called Patton, and it was about General Patton in World War II. And one of the big takeaways from me in that movie was when General Patton went to the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital to visit the soldiers that were injured in battle. So as he was walking through that hospital, he saw soldiers with, you know, broken arms and missing limbs and things like that. And he was coaching them, and he was being very energetic and telling them that they did a great job. And then he came across a soldier who was just saying, "I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore." And, you know, General Patton said to him, he said, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "I just can't take it anymore." He said, "Get this soldier back to the battlefield." And what that meant to me was trauma is not always visible. And I think now in this day and age, we are certainly more receptive to the fact that trauma appears in many different ways, which is why we're having this conversation. And, you know, everyone really needs to be on the lookout for the way that trauma can manifest and be prepared to assist in, you know, whatever way that they can. Let's go ahead and jump into another video snippet here.
My parents don't understand. All the drinking and fighting means I'm scared. I'd like a cuddle, perhaps a bedtime story, but mostly I'd like them to stop shouting at me. And sometimes they hit me. Feeling scared every day and not feeling loved or wanted will change me for the rest of my life. Later, I'll have problems at school, problems with alcohol, and I'll get in trouble with the police. What's happening to me right now means I'm more likely to have serious health problems in middle age and die sooner than I should.
Okay, let's talk about trauma theory a bit. There's the event, how it was internalized, potentially epigenetic, inheritance, and after effects. PTSD, which I referred to just earlier, and, you know, being triggered, etc. We're going to give you the definition of epigenetic in the chat. That's some homework here, because it is, again, one of these nuanced terms that is, you know, very relevant as our, you know, communication continues to evolve. So, talking about trauma theory, let's start with Lori.
Thank you. Well, one of my favorite persons that I have been following recently is Dr. Bruce Perry. And I've just gained a lot of information from him in that his work is very clear to understand, and he puts a lot together to be able to identify what trauma is and how it affects the nervous system. So for me, this is something big that I am navigating in my own life, but also with the children that I work with as well. So we know the effects of trauma can impact not just one area of learning, but it affects the whole process of learning. So we have 8 different systems, like I mentioned before, 8 different sensory systems. And when they're not coordinating together, it's really difficult to process information. It's difficult for the body to know how to physically respond to the environment. For example, like for the kids that we're working with that have experienced trauma, we know that motor planning can be an issue, which a lot of times we want to think about trauma as just being a mental health response, but the cognitive and the motor planning is a big portion of that as well. So it's, as Dr. Perry states, is that when our kids are in fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, sometimes they're in a lesser area of that, and sometimes it becomes more extreme. So there's kind of like a spectrum of how they respond. But a lot of our kids are living somewhere in that space, whether it's mild or extreme, and they now know that during that period, the brain is actually functioning no longer in the upper center of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, but it's dropping down into lower centers of the brain. And as we drop down into lower centers of the brain, not only do we not have access to that, but it's found that our functional IQ decreases the lower we go down. So if we can imagine kids trying to do their jobs in school, where they have to sit and stay regulated when they're around all these people, there might be a lot of noises, there's high expectations, they're having motor problems, maybe writing is difficult, the anxieties are high. It's very hard for them to access that part of the brain that's going to allow them to learn the skills that they need to learn. So it's very, like we've been talking about, sometimes it's very hard to identify, because it is so internalized, right? We haven't really, as a society, created the language to discuss it yet, but we are having these kind of discussions, and that is improving. But I think that's a big part of understanding how it affects our kids, and then how it affects us in adulthood. So we don't, we miss over opportunities to learn because our brain is not functioning in the level that's able to process a higher level of learning. So that's it for me. That was a huge takeaway in terms of understanding the IQ piece, because it really says a lot in terms of our ability, not just our want or our need to learn math and language and those kind of things. It's our capability if we are in those states of survival states. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to circle back. We're talking about trauma theory. And one of the definitions, or one of the words that we used was epigenetic. And while we placed that in the chat, I just wanted to kind of verbalize that a little bit, because I just heard it for the first time. So I'm sure maybe some other people heard it for the first time as well. So epigenetic, relating to changes, especially heritable changes in the characteristics of a cell or organism that result from altered gene expression or other effects not involving changes to the DNA sequence itself. So epigenetic is, kind of in the line of nurture versus nature. So that was just a quick definition as we continue discussing trauma theory at this point during the Dean Talks. Carrie?
Thank you for that definition. Yeah, that was when I was parenting a child that had experienced severe trauma and showed PTSD, learning that how that some of that is passed down through their genes changing, their chromosomal changes that have occurred from history that we don't know. And I found that to be extremely helpful, that yes, his experiences themselves were traumatic and caused his behaviors, and but that on top of that, he was already at a disadvantage of being able to regulate those experiences through previous family members having the same experiences. I know that that like abuse, you sometimes will see that it will be in the family line, and it's amazing how, at least I feel like it's amazing how science has caught up to that and showing that due to a person being in the reptilian brain, the lower brain, and having your higher blood pressure constantly, that can change your chromosomes and your genes. And then you pass that down to your next generation, to your next child. And knowing that as the next generation can help you figure out what's going on when you have those traumatic responses, and how you can then rewire your brain and figure out how to deal with the responses in a more healing manner, instead of feeling that you're just out of control. If you understand that this is not just because of your current experience, but also you already are at a disadvantage. So you have to work a little bit harder, which is unfortunate, but I found that it assisted my child in understanding that.
Okay. And Steve, continuing our discussion about trauma theory.
Yes, I believe everything that Carrie and Laureate actually attributed to this topic, I think is so very important for all of us to be very conscious of when we're working with any of our clients, or just working with children in general, or anyone who may have experienced some type of trauma, and noticing that the significant impact that it will have. We definitely recognize, and I appreciate the response of being able to offer that definition, because that was the first time I've heard about it too as well. I do think that our responses, as I spoke about a little bit earlier, as far as our internal responses, becomes a lasting impression on us, for us to be able to, on how we interact with others, or how we function on a daily and weekly and/or monthly basis. And I think that those are things that are very conscious for us to really, in working with our clients, or working with anybody who may be struggling with any kind of anybody who may be struggling with any type of trauma at that point, to really be conscious of those what's the word? I'm drawing a blank right now, but those signs, those triggers, or there's any aspects of those. In working with a lot of my clients, I've noticed that they will either revert to either doing something that they're either hurting themselves, or becoming physically aggressive towards other people. And that kind of goes back to a lot of the other things that I was talking about in regards to the fight or flight and fawn responses. Those are very intricate in really realizing on how to, because we also know that dealing with each person who's had trauma before is very different in how they respond to it. So being able to approach it and support them in a way that allows them to be much more supported, but also equipped with all their tools. I like to think of 3 different ways, such as mental grounding, as well as soothing grounding, or maybe even just emotional or physical grounding. I'm sorry, just kind of breathing exercises and techniques that we've talked about before. Soothing just by even just thinking of happy places where you can relax. Repeating and saying constant positive affirmations are things that I think that have been very helpful and useful for a lot of my clients. In addition to utilizing this trauma-focused approach that I've been working with, and which is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is working with the children and their families and the support systems, and trying to find ways not only for us to kind of reduce some of that those symptoms, but as well as giving them a voice and identifying what those emotions are, especially for younger children who find it very challenging to identify what those things are and or be able to pinpoint exactly what was happening in that moment, and not necessarily taking on the weight and the pressure of what that trauma may have had what that experience they've had on them.
Okay, thank you very much. And epigenetic is certainly a word that we've discussed and included in this session. And using these words and defining these words is one of our important missions as we kind of push this conversation forward. Things are constantly evolving, and it's important to have a forum so that we can stay as current as possible, because the one thing that's certain is change, especially as we try to hone in on definitions and get some clarity. Let's look at trauma at school. Here's a video for you to watch.
Disturbing video shows a 7-year-old boy, and he's been ordered to stay inside a so-called seclusion room. He approaches the school aide several times trying to get out. Each time she pushes him back. At one point, she pins his arm against the wall. The boy gives her a kick. Then the aide puts him in a headlock.
And she just loses that.
Beth Sandy said that her son was severely traumatized by his experiences in the seclusion room.
For months, I couldn't hug my son. He didn't want to be touched.
Like most 7-year-old boys, Staley has boundless energy. But Staley has been diagnosed with a severe case of ADHD.
Hard to sit still, hard to take direction.
His parents enrolled him in the Gages Lake School outside Chicago. It offers a tailored education to kids like Staley.
Staley, you gotta get down.
Beth knows her son's ADHD makes him difficult to handle.
But you gotta get down.
But she says she had no idea why her son's behavior suddenly changed. He became much more withdrawn and didn't want to go back to school.
I hate school, but I used to love it.
The parents say they didn't know anything about the existence of a seclusion room until she saw this video.
I was so upset.
Staley is now being homeschooled. The state of Illinois is investigating possible abuse in more than 20,000 cases throughout the state involving students being placed inside seclusion rooms.
Somebody should be held accountable.
So, how do instructors or parents help when they're overwhelmed or even traumatized themselves? How do you inform the layman? Carrie?
It's so hard to go after that clip. So when a child has experienced trauma, touch can be extremely harder than what you think it's going to be. So that child was probably was reacting to touch. You have the oversenses going on when you're in fight, flight, and freeze. So that clip was extremely difficult to watch as a parent that had a child with PTSD. But to the question, how do you get the schools to help? I think that one of the quotes that I can't recall who said it, but in one of the many books that I read when parenting my child, was that no child says when they grow up they want to be a bad person. Like every child, every behavior has a reason behind that behavior, and looking at not the behavior itself, but why is the child reacting this way when you're asking them to do something, or if you touch them or anything like that. As an instructor myself, at a university level, I try to approach my students in a similar way. When I see that a child or an adult, a young adult, is struggling with an assignment or struggling just showing up, pulling them aside and talking to them and trying to figure out what is behind that behavior instead of just seeing the behavior at face value. How for us, we gave our teachers a section of one of the books that I really love by Dr. Karen Purvis, who did research at Texas Christian University with adopted children and trauma. The Connected, Empowered to Connect is the organization that we went through and learning how to parent our child within trauma-informed means. But it talked about ways to bring their sensory levels back to regulation, which Lori had talked about. And so like in my classroom, I have really hard gum because the pressure that you can create in your mouth can help regulate your brain and bring you back on track. And figuring out those little things that you can give to teachers to help them bring a child back down, and giving those tools in their toolbox instead of outing a child, saying this child is this way because of this or that, but delivering it as a tool for a teacher. I even use that tool with my ADHD students because it helps them regulate their brain and be able to focus if they're chewing like on hard stuff. So those, like as a parent, when you are in that situation, I didn't realize that I was doing constant yoga breathing when I was parenting my child for a year until after he left. But as a parent, you have to, and as a teacher, you have to regulate yourself the way that you want the child to regulate. And so that does mean checking in with yourself. That meant for me, whenever my child was driving me insane, I had a timeout instead of him having a timeout. I went to my room and breathed and reconfigured myself, and so that I can then approach him. And the other thing about that video that really bothered me is a lot of times when children are when they're pushing away, they're crying out to not be pushed away, that they really need the closeness of a reliable and safe adult to be with them while they dysregulate. And if they know that they have that adult that is going to be with them during that time, that dysregulation will become less and less. We found out with our child, we did not grounding, but more that like if he got in trouble, he had to be next to us for like an entire weekend. So because he found his regulation through our regulation, because children mimic and learn through viewing and experiencing it from the safe adult. So we would bring him in closer instead of pushing him away. And so that teacher pushing the child away is the exact opposite of what that child needed at that time. He needed someone to sit still in that room with him, and then he would probably have sat still and regulated with the teacher that's regulating with him. I hope that helps.
Okay. That was a very, very powerful video, and thank you for pointing that out. Lori, we're talking about methods for treating trauma.
Yes, thank you. Carrie, I everything that you just said is really what was coming up for me as well, is that whole piece about co-regulation. And we know how important it is, but we also know that, and like we've talked today as well, is often when our children are dysregulated, parents are also, or the environment could be dysregulated as well. So, and typically, sometimes it's really hard for people to even know that that's dysregulated, like that's just the normal. So giving the opportunity for parents to understand like what this is going on with their children, how the best way for them to help that child is to help themselves regulate. That is really huge, because that co-regulation piece is just foundational to that child being able to get to a place neurologically, emotionally, that they can't get to on their own. So some of the things in terms of this question, what's going on? How can we do that? How can we educate our parents and bring them into the piece? Well, there are school workshops that are a great idea. I know there's a school called Mars Estate Elementary is doing a fabulous job with this, and they have parent night every Wednesday. And it's a mental health parent night. They connect, which is also a huge part of the equation, regulation and connection. So they're creating the space for parents to come together and understand something that they never were, that wasn't a part of the dialogue growing up. And for us, it wasn't a part of the dialogue. So how do we learn something that we've never even heard about before? So they're creating a safe space for parents to be able to do that and explore that so that they can become regulated and help their children. They're also doing like fun brain game nights, again, to bring the families together, and they are playing together, which is so important. And doing that under the umbrella of a school. So now the school is now the place that is creating the environment for regulation, and it's passing it out, and it's expanding it into the families' homes, which I think is just the foundational piece to our communities being able to raise their level of awareness, so we can take care of ourselves in the way that we need to and we want to, so we feel good, and so we can help other people come up to their best potential. So I think that's a really big piece for us. We're going to be doing a book discussion again on Dr. Perry's What Happened to You book, which really dives deep into this, but it's deep with the language that's accessible. So you don't even have to be a neurologist or a therapist to understand it. And so by creating something that is going to be very non-threatening, this isn't the kind of a book group where we have to recite great passages of anything, because, I'm not there, I know a lot of our parents aren't there, and that doesn't appeal to them. But if we can come together, create that connection, we can learn a little pieces about what we see in our lives, what this book is educating us on, some insight, and how do we move forward with that in our own lives so we can expand it out. So I think there's a lot, and this what is happening today is a big piece of that as well, is creating the space to have the discussion and to learn some key pieces that we can take from here and explore in our own lives. So
to kind of push the point forward about this Dean Talks, this is important. You're listening to the Dean Talks. For more information, you can certainly visit ripefruit.org. As you can see, or maybe you can't see, we are kind of moving in logical steps. Our last question was about trauma theory. This question is about methods for treating trauma. Angel, could you circle back into the trauma theory piece a little bit before you address this topic for methods?
Yes. So with the trauma theory piece, I wanted to add to what Ms. Curry was saying about how it is genetics, and when you can identify it, it's easier to deal with. Because growing up, I'm from Baltimore, and I was actually diagnosed with lead poisoning when I was 2 years old. And that was something that I was aware of. And because I was aware of it, I was able to work harder. You know what I mean? Because like she said, you are going to have to work harder. It is a reality for a lot of Baltimoreans and people who are who deal with trauma. And so, but knowing that and being aware of that helped me just wear it on my shoulder, you know what I mean, and say I do have this diagnosis, but I was able to, I graduated on the dean's list. I have a master's degree. I've taught on the college level, so it's very much something that I've been able to identify, and know that it is a part of me, but not have it as my identity. Because students that I know, some people that I know that have lead poisoning, they are, using it as a self-fulfilling prophecy, saying, I have lead poisoning, and so I can't do these things. So, but when you have different experiences and you identify them, but you work towards fighting against them, then it's very much, I won't say easier, but you know the work that you have to do. So I wanted to thank Carrie for bringing that up, because it can be harder. And but there is work to do and it can be done. And for this question, that video was so hard to watch. Just working in the school system, I feel like I'm having a traumatic experience just sitting here looking at that video. Because one thing that I do find in the school system, and I've worked in several schools, is that there aren't enough resources. You know, like even having a whatever that was, a timeout room, that's not a resource or reinforcement for behavior, you know, for bad behavior. But schools are using their extra classrooms or their lack of resources to help with the trauma-informed child, and it's not working. And the one things that schools don't have is a lot of resources. So I remember one time I had two students get into a fight, and because I had them sharing coloring pencils. And so because the school is lacking resources and I don't have color pencils, I didn't spend my money on it, I'm using the resources that the school has. And so when I seen that they're fighting over the green color pencil, and a whole fight breaks out between two sixth graders. And so I had to use my money to go and buy more colored pencils because I don't want that in my classroom again. But even things like Carrie was saying, like hard gum, or I've seen some teachers use fidgets. Those are things that teachers are usually bringing into the classroom themselves. So the lack of resource and the lack of money spent in certain areas really impacts the way students are being treated. And, you know, but if students just have more things in the classroom where there are more positive reinforcements, you know what I mean? Like even let's say if I had hard gums to offer some eighth graders, my classroom would quiet immediately. You know what I mean? So little things like that. But but that's my first time hearing, again, thank you, Carrie, for saying that. I didn't even know that helped, you know, but so offering more resources for the school system would really help, because a lot of these schools, either the money is being spent in the wrong way, or they just don't have it. They don't have the resources to deal with so many trauma-informed students, and they don't have they aren't being educated on the topics. And it's really sad because, like that video, like I said, that was traumatic for me because I've seen that before. I've seen teachers deal with students in a very traumatic way. I've been stressed out where I'm yelling in the classroom because it's after lunch and I have a classroom after lunch and they're just rowdy and I just don't know what to do with them because I had a long day, you know. So it's very much that you got to be educated on the topics, but for some reason, the school system isn't educating their educators on trauma and traumatic experiences.
Absolutely correct. And hopefully we are bringing the resources and expertise together here at the Dean Talks. Steve, we're talking about methods for treating trauma.
Thank you so much. And I think what everyone has been talking about, I think is always very, very powerful because of the fact that have had some type of experience either through our own lives or just in working with other individuals, children, as well as adults. And one of the things that I have found in this work is when I started the opportunity to work with trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is a evidence-based treatment program that was created some time ago and had a lot of empirical evidence in working with children and as well as adolescents, and really kind of finding ways to support them so that they are finding either specific interventions for cognitive, behavioral, family, humanistic principles and techniques so that they can really be successful in all of this. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about when I started working in this particular area was that they had such a parent and caregiver component to this program. And the reason why I think that it's very important because they are essential to the children that we work with. They really kind of, I think what a lot of you guys are already kind of hinting to, or really the folks that were on the panel, was really kind of talking about how do we get parents to be more informed about what's happening. And I think that is such an essential part to the success of that child, to being able to be much more, has much more strength and much more confidence in themselves in going through and dealing and really working through their symptoms when it comes to their trauma. And I think that in using this approach is so very vital because it allows them for us to help those types of parents, because they too may be also experiencing trauma, like such as if there was domestic violence in the home. How do you support that parent who also was the one who was the abused one in that family, but also trying to also be supportive to their child who also had to witness that? That is very, very important, and really kind of supporting them, but doing it in a way where that they are recognizing their own feelings when they're being distressed and how to best support their other child in that process. And also being able to inform them that this is a family treatment. This is everyone that is going to go through this process, and everyone is going to have the opportunity to work through this process together and understand more about each other, as well as how they've responded to this process. One of the things that I also, in addition to all of that, I think that, in thinking about working with these families and especially these parents, is that while we're improving and enhancing and providing all the tools that we can for those parents, they can also be able to meet with these teachers. And I think that is also the other part of it, that a lot, as Angel was mentioning, is that a lot of our schools are just not informed about trauma and how to best approach that. They just don't have the skills or don't have the resources to address any of that. So does it sometimes fall on the parents to do a lot more work? Unfortunately, yes, but fortunately and unfortunately. But I do think that as long as the more people who have the essential tools and techniques to be able to address some of these things, it will allow the opportunity for that children, as well as for that community around that child and that family, to be much more supportive and equipped with everything that they have. Being able to not only provide psychoeducation and what that really means for them, but also parenting skills in that moment, especially when that child is having any behavioral reactions or destruction or anything like that, providing relaxation techniques, and working through any cognitive processing and coping is very important. And with all of that, I think, as I said before, being able to provide that child with any of the essential tools and working through that, and having those sessions with that parent and that child, only will allow the process for the both of them to work through their own experiences, but also be able to support each other when they're feeling like things are becoming a little bit much more challenging for them, and working through those. So I would certainly agree with what everyone was saying about providing the support and guidance for these parents, because we know that it's very essential and important for them to have it, so that they can also do the work and work through their own work with their child at the same time.
Thank you very much for your contribution, sir. And we have another video to take a look at.
Ever since the journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones published the brilliant Pulitzer Prize-winning 1619 Project in 2019, the pressure has turned up to erase and dismiss the harsh realities that existed in this country, both then and now. Some of the most conservative among us believe that CRT was designed to help divide the country and convince younger white students that they are bad people. When the previous president spoke about CRT, he further fanned the flames of white fragility and poked the conservative fear and insecurities. As a result, right-leaning parents and educators have decided that CRT is a poison, and they must have this uprooted from the American education system. Here's the facts. It was never studied in K through 12. Have you ever heard about CRT in high school? I'm not gonna lie, if those three words were ever a part of your academic career, you were most likely in law or graduate school. Critical race theory is about understanding the numerous systematic imbalances that have kept so many citizens in this nation from moving forward at a pace of equality. Look, in order for collective understanding to happen, all the members in the collective have to be willing and open and honest to have these cringe-worthy conversations. It begs the question, what good are we as a nation if we're not willing to confront the ills of the past and educate our youth so they're not doomed to repeat the same mistakes that we'll never forget, but they sure want us to? At the end of the day, this is what we need to do, man. Be black, buy black, support black. This is Jason Aaron with Revolt. Peace.
According to psychologist Gabriel Mate, who recently wrote a book on the topic, You Can't Be Traumatized by Simply Hearing About an Event. How do we equity a classroom environment to prepare for transparency and access that lawmakers seem to want to legislate? Lori?
Yes, thank you. No, that video was great. I really agree, especially with his point about when have we discussed critical race theory, in the idea that really we need to start young. It needs to be incorporated into our full-on school curriculum. I am not an expert on critical race theory, but I want to, if I want to look at this again, I think if we approach this strictly from a cognitive perspective, again, I think or a top-down, cognitive down perspective, I think we're really missing an opportunity for our kids to learn, however old they are, little kids all the way up to high school, college, and parents of these kids as well. Because this is really not how our nervous system works. So I feel like we already know there's a lot of kids that are dysregulated coming into the school for various reasons, and they could be that could be a result of trauma that this could have an impact on. And I think like Gabor Mate had mentioned, having these conversations is not a traumatic event, but it is something that can make people dysregulated. And that's not a problem. Like, that shouldn't be a problem. That shouldn't be a barrier, because that's life. And we have to figure out how to move beyond that. So I wonder, what it would look like if a lesson or a classroom or a semester is really looking at it initially, really infusing that trauma lens in there, just as a historical perspective, but also as what's going on in their neurological systems as they discuss it. What would it be like if they had a session or a class where their lesson was on their phones and they were walking for 20 minutes together as a class while they're listening to the lesson, and then their bodies and their minds are regulated and in a space that now they can come together and have a conversation about what they're learning. It's kind of just flipping things upside down a little bit, because I think, again, if we push it from the top down, the amount of resistance, as we're already seeing, as this video demonstrated, the amount of resistance inside of the classroom, outside of the classroom, is going to be very great. But if we give them the tools, and this starts from early on, giving them the tools to be able to handle what's going on when their body starts to dysregulate, it will allow them to be able to be in a place where they are accessing a higher problem-solving areas of the brain, to be able to take in the historical context of what the lessons are providing, and being able to do that in a way that is more of a conscious way rather than a subconscious and reactive way. And again, I would say that in addition to that, to the kids learning that way, we need to have a program in place for the parents to learn that way as well. I know our school systems, that's a big ask. But I think it kind of goes hand in hand, taking care of that neurological piece first, and then preparing ourselves for the cognitive piece across the board in our educational system, but specifically when we talk about critical race theory.
Thank you for the insight, Angel.
I thought that video was very, very powerful, and he's right. But I will say that we talked about race when I was in maybe elementary, middle school, and taking critical race theory out of the schools one thing that I find that it does is that it takes away identity. So, and I'll tell a little story. So recently I did ancestry.com, and I found out from my DNA that I was like 30% Cameroon, like 10% from Ghana, and like the rest of me is from Nigeria. And that was really, really, it really did something to me, because I've never had no idea about, my DNA and where it's from. But as a people, as Black people, which critical race theory really impacts, there's a constant taking away our identity. But the more that you do that, the less that you know yourself. Identifying, knowing through that DNA test, knowing a little bit about where my DNA is from, or where my ancestors came from, it was slightly empowering. So when you're taking away your history, because that's all it is, it's American history. When you're taking away, or African American history in America, you're losing more of your identity. There's a constant stripping away of the identity and the history, and there's a lack of pride. And so when you have that lack of pride, then you have a lack of people knowing who they are and standing on values and standing on just things that you believe in, and also culture. There's a loss of culture. So there's a strong way that you see that African Americans have created their own culture. Like, like if I meet someone who, I taught a group of students in South Baltimore, most of them were Spanish, and they kept asking me, "Why do you call yourself Black? You're brown." And I'm like, that's what we call ourselves here. So that's something that we have created as African Americans. But there's we've created our own culture and our own way of seeing ourselves. And there's a constant ripping away of that when you take away learning about it in schools and our actual history. So it has to be in schools, simply because we are already a people that are in a land that we're not really from, you know what I mean? And so we have to learn about ourselves and how we got here and why we're here and why there is this residue of what happened so many years ago, and it's very important to learn about it. And even though, and I'm gonna be honest, it can be traumatic. I remember in 5th grade, we had to watch Roots. And I could not watch it. I couldn't watch it. But as Lori said earlier, I got to understand my bodily response. So that movie and me having a bodily response, why am I reacting this way? Because it impacts me. Because I know that my mother went through Jim Crow laws. You know what I mean? Because that I know that my grandmother it's the reason why she acts the way she acts. So, but we can't know why we're having these bodily responses, even if it is a traumatic experience in the school system, or like while they're teaching it. You gotta dive into it, or it's just gonna be we don't know why I'm acting this way. Because as Carrie said earlier, it's not, even if we take it out of schools, it's still in our DNA. You know what I mean? It's still gonna be there. But now we're gonna have no idea why. We're not even gonna understand why. It's just gonna be, oh, the Black kids are wild, And that's not okay. It has to be in the school system. It has to be there.
And one of our main initiatives is seeing how the Right Fruit Foundation can enhance school systems when it comes to curriculum and even classroom development. Visit rightfruit.org for more information. Steve, we're talking about the psychologist Gabriel Mate, who recently wrote a book about trauma, and simply hearing about the event isn't enough. How do we equitize classrooms and lawmakers?
Well, this is such a very challenging conversation, but also a very, very important conversation for it to continue to be happening. As Angel spoke so very eloquently, and as well as Lori and Carrie, just about the impact of removing some of this information and from the school systems and just from life in general. Because a lot of times, as Angel was mentioning, that a lot of times a lot of our families or our children are not necessarily being given the opportunity to understand more about who they are. A lot of these individuals, as Black and brown kids and children and people, have this mindset that we all started in slavery. But we're missing the mindset of the fact that we started off as kings and queens. And the problem is that a lot of times when we get into that mindset and we transition from that all the way to MLK, to Malcolm X, to Rosa Parks, and then now we're here, and it's like all this different time space that we missed out on who we are. I think it's even more traumatic. I think when we are gathering and finding ways on how to incorporate this life, or incorporate our history into that, which is not necessarily in addition, it should be already automatically into what we see as American history and where we've gotten from and how we've gotten to this place, and getting to a place that is we're very transparent. When thinking about trauma and answering one of the questions or the statements about how does this would this actually re-traumatize someone by hearing their story? And again, and I will fight against that. I will certainly fight against that from a lot of the children that I've worked with. And as challenging and as difficult as it is to hear about, or even to talk about them being sexually abused at 6 years old and having their uncle touch them multiple times, in having that thought burn in their minds, and then sit back and wonder and say that, well, if we talk about it again, that will re-traumatize them. Well, in actuality, they've already been traumatized. Now, the only best way, the other possible solution or opportunity that we have is to be able to give that particular child the opportunity for them to grow, for them to heal, for them to progress to where they are, understand more about who they are in their bodies and their right and their power that they have within them. And once you strip that away, they don't necessarily ever have the opportunity to be able to move forward and progress. And I think that is it's a tragedy to be able to put someone through that type of position and anything that they've gone through and any kind of trauma. And, you know, and we were speaking specifically about children in that capacity, but nonetheless, I think that anybody who hasn't had the opportunity to be able to be well equipped and informed about more about their history and who they are and where they're coming from is so very critical and important to that going forward. Angel, I love the fact that you mentioned about doing your history. And I think that is one thing that I've kind of wrestled with. My family was born on the island of Haiti, and transitioning from there to now to what they were going through at the time in the late 60s and in the middle to late 60s, and transitioning here to America and trying to find a way of life, because we thought that things were much different here in America just because of how things were laid out. And although it may have appeared that way, there were different struggles that that my family had to experience. And I think that realizing and understanding more about who you are and your true identity allows much more expansion of the mind, but also as well as expansion of the people within that community and understanding everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is inherently evil. No, not at all. I think that everyone has a past and has a history, and everyone has the opportunity to be able to grow from that. And if not given that proper information and history, I don't think anyone will be able to really progress and won't be able to see the amount of change that we'd like to see in this world, as well as in this history, in this world, for anyone that is connected.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, please do. Jump right ahead.
Yes, and I want to say also, just for educators anyone working with students who watch this, who are still trying to teach critical race theory, it's also empowering to tell the stories of of triumphant. You know what I mean? Like, okay, Black people have this traumatic history, but we as a race, we've really overcome a lot of things. You know what I mean? So I think that we have to keep that narrative going. You know what I mean? Like, yes, and yes, this did happen, and this is why it's important. And also, I think that you got to educate these students on this, because if you're an educator, you're no stranger to the fact that a lot of students are not on the reading level and grade level that they're supposed to be in. And sometimes when I meet students who don't care about reading or learning how to read, or just aren't on the reading level and they don't care at all, it breaks my heart, because I got to remind them, do you know that we weren't allowed to read? before? You know what I mean? So that's why the history is so important. You have to remind them that there's reasons that you should want to do this and you should take pride in doing it because of your history, because of your ancestors. There's a time when there were things that you weren't allowed to do. And now you can, and you should take pride in that, and you should say it with your chest. Like, yes, I can read, you know what I mean? And I am able to do this. And my ancestors were this way, but I'm not going to continue that narrative. You know, that should be a constant yes and, you know, conversation with this critical race theory conversation.
The contributions here are priceless. Carrie?
A few things that I wanted to say about critical race theory and trauma. Healing only happens in relationship and community. And if you take that out of the school system where it's not able to be talked about, you are then reducing the ability of healing in the community. A person heals and through talking about traumatic experiences, even if it was historical traumatic experiences, because those historical traumatic experiences changed their ancestors' DNA through their ancestors being in constant survival mode. And so it gives them meaning and understanding of their own experiences. And if a Black student is not able to have that conversation, they're not able to have that healing in the community. And if we want to heal as a nation, we have to have these conversations. And trauma is an experience. It's not hearing about an experience. You have to go through the experience to have trauma, not hearing about it. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that lawmakers and people who are wanting to keep this out of the educational system is they don't understand that basic line of what trauma is. So yeah, and that's really sad because that will keep our nation from healing together and becoming a stronger community together, because we will only be as strong as everybody is.
This has just been such a powerful conversation. I feel that we're just kind of on the tip of the iceberg. Panelists, it's now time to give your contact information and talk to us a little bit about what you're currently working on. Angel?
So you can reach me via email at angelwilson391@gmail.com. So Angel Wilson, my first and last name, 391@gmail.com. And you can also find me on on Instagram and Facebook at Angel King Wilson, Angel King Wilson. And currently I am right now I am working on, I have a documentary called Hiding in the Walls. And Hiding in the Walls is an award-winning documentary. We've actually been in several film festivals. It's a film about lead poisoning and the lead poisoning crisis in Baltimore, Maryland. As I said, I was diagnosed with lead poisoning when I was 2 years old. So in that film, we have 4 other subjects who talk about their experience in growing up with lead poisoning and how they panned out. Because one thing that we're trying to do with this film is destigmatize that lead poisoning, the stigma behind lead poisoning. We want to change it, because even though you're diagnosed with lead poisoning, you can still become what society tells you aren't, that you can't. So also I have a book called Am I Doing This Right?, where I talk about this experience growing up in Baltimore, my experience as a woman, and also having lead poisoning. And the last thing that I'm doing is I have a publishing company, and you can find that, I'll put it all in the chat. It's called Silent Books Publishing. And one of the main goals of Silent Books Publishing is to elevate the voices of people of color, because our stories need to be told. So far we've published several books, helped several people self-publish their books, and this is something that I'm very proud of. But I'll put all my information in the chat, and please follow me on Instagram or reach out to me if you are interested in anything, the film, the book, or self-publishing a book. Thank you everyone. I enjoyed this panel so much.
And thank you for joining us. Carrie?
I am currently teaching at Stevenson University. You can contact me through my email there at kmiller15@stevenson.edu. Other projects that I'm working on, I'm a visual artist, so I am creating large drawings about trauma and neurodiversity. I'm hoping to start a graduate program where I will be creating those into more of a full room experience so that people can continue the conversation about trauma through my graduate program, but we shall see when that occurs. On Instagram, I'm at tinydogpress.com or tinydogpress. That is my other business. I'm a letterpress printer by day.
Outstanding. Lori, how can we contact you and what are you up to?
Yes. I could be contacted at Lori, Lori, at childrenstherapy.group, or you could reach me through our web address at www.childrenstherapy.group. Right now, our biggest thing that we're doing is we're really trying to connect the families who have Medicaid, the Medicaid community, with occupational therapy and speech therapy services for them. And it's interesting because there are some baked in obstacles to that, which I'm recognizing. So I'm having to try to get creative and go around those a little bit to be able to reach the families that might need our services. So that's one of the things. Another part of what we really want to do is that parent piece, which is not part of Medicaid. It's really part of our practice. And so we're trying to create ways for parents to be connected and also to continue to learn more about trauma and how it affects development, how it may have affected their development, and how to regulate their system so that they can be co-regulators for their children. I've enjoyed today. Today has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you so much for your contributions.
Yep.
Steve, what's going on with you and how do we reach out?
Thank you so much. This was a very fruitful conversation, and I appreciate giving the opportunity to be a part of this. I will include any of my information in the chat. Just as for everyone, my name is Stephen Fabius. I did include my email address, which is stephen.fabius@nphcinc.com. That is my email address and where I'm at, and that is the local number that you can be able to contact me as well. Currently, right now, I am working at National Pike Health Center, and I have been their clinician for going on 4 years. But now I'm actually in the process of creating an actual department. And the department is entitled Family Engagement Department, which is really focusing being able to provide a high quality consumer driven behavioral health services for families, in addition, as well as couples, and working in the Catonsville area. You can certainly contact me, and so that we can be able to answer any questions, provide any services, or any families or couples or individual treatment as well. If you do have anyone that may be interested in that, please feel free to reach out. We are in the process, the infancy stages of putting this together. So I'm looking forward to meeting the other resources and other people that are within the area, as well as building up a lot of my tools and resources that I can tap into. So feel free to reach out to me. As I said before, my name is Stephen Fabius, and phone number is there, 410-744-8100. And my last name is spelled F as in Frank, A as in Apple, B as in boy, I-U-S. Thank you again.
Panel, thank you so much for joining us here on the Dean Talks, and make sure that to find out how to contact these panelists, visit ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org. Big hits and takeaways. What did we learn? The filter for this is Ebony Kenny. Ebony?
Not the filter, one filter for it. So once again, just wowed by the entire conversation, humbled, and really learned so much. I think one of the major pieces that, as we talk about trauma, and for those of you that attended or will watch this into eternity, trauma, it's actually more of an outlier for you not to have been touched by trauma. So as we unpack trauma, let's not think about this group over here that we have to try and find budget line items for. We have to try and justify that these people are in the room. Let's assume they are in the room. If they aren't in the room, they probably will be. And then move move from that space. So some of the big takeaways was immediately the amazing definition of trauma that Steve gave us. And he talked us through the different aspects of it. Children need to be trauma informed and they need your vulnerability. Angel, that was one of the pieces, not a direct quote from you, but kind of eye-opening on that end. Children need to be trauma informed and we need your vulnerability. Okay, and then the lower brain and the lower functioning IQ, Lori, when you kind of dipped into that piece, that helped us kind of understand. We aren't talking logically with someone trying to help them understand in a logic space, right? We're more in a feeling space. Steve gave us a therapeutic approach to helping families and people self-treat their symptoms. Carrie gave us a glimpse into a university classroom, which includes sensitivity about outing a child. And parent timeouts, which I love. So they need closeness and safety. People need closeness and safety while they dysregulate also was eye-opening to me personally. Co-regulation. The responsibility of those that are traumatized, Angel brought out for us. Trauma lens on history, also eye-opening. I love the idea of a guided tour where people are taken through this history, but at the same time, working with their peers. So we're going to work on that. Steve took us to church on his appeal to inform a holistic approach to history. So, with everyone that is in the room and all of the life experiences that are here represented in a classroom in a therapeutic group, how can we have a holistic approach to that history? And then you have to go through an experience to have the trauma. Thank you, Carrie, for that quote. And it's not just hearing about it that's going to have this impact. Like, we need an ad campaign. Like, how do we take it to the streets? So some great takeaways and some great kind of quotes that came. Also, just for reference, Mars Estates Elementary School is doing some great work, creating space for parents to come together. Dr. Bruce Perry in his book, What Happened to You, and Dr. Karen Purvis and some research that she did with adopted kids in trauma. I want to thank all of the panelists for coming. Very much had an eye-opening experience, and I can't wait to just continue the conversation with you.
And that wraps up the Dean Talks. We talked about trauma, and we have a whole series of Dean Talks available at ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. And thank you to the future listeners of the Dean Talks. My name is Stephen King, your host, and we will see you next time.